The chains on Alara's wrists were cold, but not as cold as the eyes, watching her from the crowd. She stood on a wooden platform in the center of the auction hall, and every second felt like an hour. The room smelled of smoke, perfume, and fear. Hundreds of alphas sat in rows of polished chairs, their gazes sharp, judging, hungry. Some laughed behind their hands, some simply looked away, already bored. Alara kept her chin up. She had promised herself she would not cry. Not here. Not in front of people who saw her as nothing more than a mistake to be sold off. Omega, female, 22 years old, the auctioneer called out, his voice booming through the hall. Weak scent, unremarkable presentation, starting bid, 100 coins. No one raised a hand. Alara felt her stomach twist. She had known this would happen. She had known it since she was a child, since the day the pack healer first frowned at her and whispered the word defective to her mother. Her scent had always been faint, almost impossible to detect, and in a world where an Omega's scent decided her worth, that made her invisible, unwanted, broken. 80 coins. The auctioneer tried again, lowering the price himself. Come now, someone must want a hard-working girl. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Someone near the front muttered something about a refund policy, and the people around him snickered. Alara's fingers curled into fists at her sides. She wanted to scream, but she stayed silent, the same way she had stayed silent every time someone in her old pack looked at her like she was less than human. She was used to being unwanted. That did not mean it hurt any less. The auctioneer sighed and glanced at his assistant, a thin man holding a clipboard. No bids. We'll move her to the labor line. The labor line. Alara had heard whispers about it from the other Omegas locked in the holding cells earlier that morning. Girls sent to the labor line disappeared into factories and mines, worked until their bodies gave out, forgotten by everyone who once called them pack. She felt her knees weaken, but she forced herself to stay standing. She would not fall apart in front of these people. Just as the assistant reached for the rope around her wrists to lead her off the platform, a voice cut through the hall. Wait. The single word carried more weight than anything else spoken that day. The entire room went still. Even the auctioneer froze, his mouth half open. From the back of the hall, near the tall doors, a figure rose from his seat. He had been sitting in the shadows the entire time, hood pulled low over his face, and no one had noticed him until now. He walked forward, and the crowd parted for him without needing to be told. There was something about the way he moved, calm and certain, that made people instinctively step aside. I bid 10,000 coins, he said. Gasps spread through the hall like fire through dry grass. 10,000 coins was a fortune, more than enough to buy every Omega in the building twice over. People turned in their seats, whispering, trying to catch a glimpse of the man beneath the hood. The auctioneer stammered, clearly unprepared for this. 10,000 coins, for her? You heard me correctly. The man reached up and pulled back his hood. The room fell into complete silence. Alara did not know his face right away, but she knew the reaction around her. Alphas who had been laughing moments ago were now bowing their heads. Women covered their mouths in shock. Someone near the front whispered a name like it was something sacred. King Draven. The words moved through the crowd like a wave. King Draven, ruler of the Northern Alpha Kingdom, the man whose name was spoken with both respect and fear across every territory in the land. He had not been seen outside his castle in nearly 2 years. And now he stood in a regional auction hall in a city far from his throne, bidding an impossible sum for the one Omega nobody else wanted. Alara felt her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone in the room could hear it. She did not understand what was happening. Kings did not attend auctions like this. Kings did not buy Omegas with weak sense, not when they could have their pick of the strongest, most desirable ones in the kingdom. Your Majesty, the auctioneer said, bowing so low his forehead nearly touched the podium. Are you certain? There must be some mistake. This girl is... I am certain, Draven said, his voice calm but final, leaving no room for argument. The bid stands. Does anyone wish to challenge it? Silence answered him. No one in the hall had 10,000 coins, and even if they did, no one would dare challenge a king. Sold, the auctioneer said quickly, eager to end the strange moment. Sold to King Draven. Alara stood frozen on the platform, As two guards approached to release the chains from her wrists, her mind raced with questions. Why would a king want her? What use could she possibly be to him? She had grown up believing she was worthless, that her weak scent made her invisible to every alpha who mattered. And yet here was the most powerful alpha in the land, willing to pay a fortune just to take her away. She searched his face for answers, but his expression gave nothing away. He looked at her the way someone might look at a puzzle they were determined to solve, careful and focused, but not unkind. "Come with me," he said quietly, once the chains fell from her wrists. Elara hesitated. Around her, the crowd still buzzed with whispers, and she could feel dozens of eyes on her back as she stepped down from the platform. She did not know this man. She did not know what waited for her outside these doors. But staying meant the labor line, and she had heard enough stories about that place to know it was worse than uncertainty. She followed him. Outside the auction hall, the air was sharp and cold, and for the first time in weeks, Elara felt like she could breathe properly. A carriage waited at the bottom of the stone steps, its dark wood polished so well, it reflected the gray sky above. Two guards stood beside it, dressed in deep blue uniforms marked with a silver wolf, the symbol of the Northern Kingdom. "You don't have to be afraid," Draven said, noticing the way her shoulders had tensed. "I am not going to hurt you." "Then why did you buy me?" The words slipped out before Elara could stop them. She immediately regretted the sharpness in her tone, half expecting him to snap at her for speaking so boldly to a king. Instead, he simply looked at her, his expression unreadable. "That is a conversation for later. Right now, you need rest. You look like you haven't eaten properly in days." He was not wrong. The auction house had barely fed the Omegas held there, just enough to keep them standing for the sale. Elara's stomach twisted at the mention of food, embarrassed that he had noticed something so obvious. The carriage ride was long. Elara sat across from Draven, watching the countryside blur past the window, her mind still spinning from everything that had happened. She stole glances at him from time to time, trying to understand the man who had just changed the direction of her entire life, with a single word. He was younger than she expected for a king, though there was an old weariness in his eyes that suggested he had carried heavy burdens for a long time. His posture was straight, controlled, every movement precise, like a man who had trained himself never to show weakness. And yet, when he looked at her, there was something else beneath the surface, something almost gentle, that did not match the cold reputation she had heard whispered about him. "You're staring," Draven said, without looking away from the window. Elara flushed and quickly turned her gaze away. "Sorry." "You don't need to apologize," he said. "You have questions. I understand that. I would too, if our situations were reversed." "Then answer one," she said, gathering her courage. "Why me? There were dozens of other Omegas at that auction. Stronger ones. Ones with sense people actually wanted. Why would you spend a fortune on someone everyone else rejected?" Draven was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Elara thought he might not answer at all. Finally he spoke. "Because you are not what they think you are." It was not the answer she expected, and it only raised more questions, but something in his tone told her he would not say more right now. She decided not to push, at least not yet. She was too tired, too overwhelmed, to process anything more complicated than the fact that she was no longer standing in chains on an auction platform. The castle came into view as the sun began to set, its towers rising against the darkening sky like something out of a story she used to hear as a child. Elara had never seen anything so large in her life. The stone walls stretched high enough to touch the clouds, and lanterns lined the pathways leading to the enormous front doors, casting a warm golden light across the courtyard. "This is where you live?" she asked, unable to hide the awe in her voice. "This is where you live now too," Draven said simply. The words settled over her strangely. She had spent her whole life being told she did not belong anywhere, that she was too plain, too quiet, too weak to matter. And now a king was telling her this castle, this place fit for legends, was her home. She did not know whether to feel grateful or terrified. The carriage came to a stop, and a group of servants immediately appeared, bowing as Draven stepped out. He turned and offered his hand to help Elara down, and she hesitated only a moment before accepting it. His hand was warm, steady, and surprisingly gentle for someone with so much power. "This is Mira," Draven said, gesturing to a woman standing near the entrance, her dark hair pulled back neatly, her expression kind but composed. "She will help you get settled and show you to your chambers." Alara blinked. "My chambers?" "Yes," Draven said. "You'll have your own rooms. Whatever you need, you only have to ask." This was not what Alara had expected. She had braced herself for something far worse, servant quarters at best, or perhaps a locked room, meant to keep her contained, until Draven decided what use she would serve. Instead, she was being given her own space, her own comfort, treatment she had never received, even in her own pack. Mira stepped forward with a warm smile. "Come along, dear. You must be exhausted. Let's get you settled before dinner." Alara glanced back at Draven, unsure of what to say. He simply nodded, as if giving her permission to go, and turned to speak with one of his guards. She followed Mira through the grand entrance hall, her footsteps echoing against the polished stone floors, past tall windows and portraits of kings long past, until they reached a wing of the castle quieter than the rest. The chambers Mira led her to took her breath away. A large bed sat against the far wall, draped in soft blankets the color of deep blue and silver. A fireplace crackled gently in the corner, filling the room with warmth. Tall windows overlooked a garden below, moonlight already beginning to spill across the flowers. "This is all for me?" Alara asked quietly, almost afraid to touch anything. "All for you," Mira confirmed. "There are fresh clothes in the wardrobe, and I'll have a bath drawn for you shortly. If you need anything at all, just ring the bell by the door." Alara sat carefully on the edge of the bed once Mira left, running her hands over the soft fabric of the blanket. Everything felt like a dream she might wake up from at any moment, one where she would open her eyes and find herself back in the auction hall, chains still around her wrists, waiting to be sent to the labor line. But this was real. She pinched her own arm just to be sure, wincing slightly at the small sting. Real. Later that evening, after a bath and a change into simple but well-made clothes, Alara sat by the window, watching the moonlight settle over the garden below. Her thoughts kept circling back to Draven's words in the carriage. "Because you are not what they think you are." What did that mean? What could a king possibly see in her that an entire kingdom of alphas had overlooked her entire life? A knock came at her door, gentle but firm. "Come in," Alara said, standing quickly, smoothing down her dress out of habit. Mira entered, carrying a tray of food. "The king thought you might prefer to eat here tonight, rather than in the main hall. He said you've had a long day." Alara felt a strange warmth at the thoughtfulness of the gesture. She had expected to be summoned, ordered to appear wherever Draven wished, not given the choice of quiet solitude after everything she had endured. "Thank you," she said softly. Mira set the tray down on a small table near the fireplace, and lingered for a moment, studying Alara, with a curious expression. "May I ask you something, dear?" Alara nodded. "Do you know why the king chose you?" "No," Alara admitted. "He wouldn't say. Only that I wasn't what everyone thinks I am." Mira's brow furrowed slightly, as if she were turning the words over in her mind, searching for some hidden meaning. "That's interesting," she said finally. "The king does not do anything without reason. Whatever it is, I'm sure he'll explain in time." After Mira left, Alara ate slowly, savoring the first proper meal she'd had in weeks. The warmth of the food, the comfort of the room, the strange kindness she had been shown since arriving. None of it made sense given everything she had believed about her own worth, for as long as she could remember. She thought of her old pack, of the whispers that followed her through every hallway, every gathering, every failed attempt at courtship that ended in rejection before it even began. She thought of the healer's frown, her mother's disappointment barely hidden behind forced smiles, the way people spoke about her like she wasn't even in the room. None of that explained why a king, of all people, would look at her and see something worth 10,000 coins. Alara finished her meal and moved to sit by the fire, pulling her knees up to her chest as she watched the flames dance. Whatever waited for her in this castle, whatever Draven's true reasons were, she knew one thing for certain. Her old life was gone. Whoever she had been at the auction house, chained and unwanted, no longer existed. She did not yet know who she would become in this place, surrounded by stone walls and secrets she had barely begun to uncover. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she allowed herself a small, cautious feeling she had almost forgotten the shape of: hope. Outside her door, Unseen by her, Draven stood in the hallway, his hand resting against the wood for a long moment before he finally turned and walked away. He had waited 2 years for this moment, searching every corner of the kingdom, following the faintest traces of a scent only he could detect, the scent of someone he had begun to fear he would never find. He had found her, at last, sold and forgotten on an auction platform, treated as though she were worthless. He intended to make sure she never felt that way again. But some truths could not be rushed. She needed time, safety, and trust before he could tell her the full weight of what her presence in his life truly meant. For now, it was enough that she was here, safe within his walls, beginning to breathe a little easier with each passing hour. The real story, the one that would change both their lives forever, was only just beginning. Alara woke to sunlight pouring through the tall windows of her chamber, warm and golden, nothing like the gray mornings she had known in her old pack. For a moment she forgot where she was, and then the memory of the auction hall, the chains, the carriage ride, and the castle rushed back all at once. She sat up slowly, half expecting the comfort of the bed beneath her to vanish like smoke. It did not vanish. The room was still there, quiet and warm, the fire from the night before reduced to soft embers in the hearth. A soft knock came at the door, and Mira stepped inside carrying a fresh set of clothes over her arm. "Good morning, dear. I hope you slept well." "I did," Alara admitted, surprised by how true it was. She had expected nightmares, restless hours spent replaying the humiliation of the auction platform. Instead, sleep had come easily, deeper and more peaceful than she remembered in a long time. "The king has asked that you join him for breakfast this morning, if you feel ready," Mira said, laying the clothes across the foot of the bed. "But if you'd rather rest another day, I can tell him you need more time." Alara considered this. Part of her wanted to hide in this room a little longer, to avoid the stares and whispers she was sure waited for her beyond these walls. But another part of her, the part that had spent her whole life being pushed aside, wanted answers. She was tired of being kept in the dark about her own life. "I'll join him," she said. Mira smiled, pleased. "Good. I'll help you get ready." The dress Mira had brought was simple but elegant, a deep green, that Alara would never have imagined wearing back in her old pack, where Omegas like her were given whatever plain, worn clothing was left over after everyone else had chosen first. She studied her reflection in the mirror for a long moment, hardly recognizing the woman looking back at her. "You look lovely," Mira said gently, noticing her hesitation. "Whatever doubts are in your head right now, dear, you can leave them in this room." Alara offered a small, grateful smile, though the doubts did not leave so easily. They followed her down the long hallways of the castle, past portraits of stern-faced kings and queens, who seemed to watch her with quiet judgment as she passed. Servants bowed as she walked by, and though their faces were polite, she caught the curious glances, the whispers exchanged the moment they thought she was out of earshot. "That's her, the one from the auction. I heard she has almost no scent at all." Why would the king choose someone like that? Alara kept her eyes forward and her steps steady, refusing to let the whispers slow her down. She had endured worse in her old pack. She could endure this too. The breakfast room was smaller than she expected, a cozy space with tall windows overlooking the garden she had seen from her chamber the night before. Draven was already seated at the table, a cup of tea in hand, reading through a stack of papers. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression softened, just slightly, though he quickly returned to his usual composed demeanor. "You slept well, I hope," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I did," Alara replied, taking the seat across from him. A servant quickly filled her cup with tea and set a plate in front of her, filled with more food than she typically ate in a full day. For a while, they ate in silence, the only sounds the soft clink of silverware and the distant chirping of birds in the garden. Alara used the quiet to study him again, the same way she had in the carriage. He carried himself with a stillness that felt practiced, controlled, but every so often she caught a flicker of something else beneath it, a weariness he seemed determined to hide. "You have questions," Draven said finally, setting down his cup. "I could see them written across your face the moment you walked in." "I have many questions," Alara admitted, "but I don't know where to start." "Start wherever you like." She took a breath, gathering her courage. The servants were whispering about me in the hallway. They said no one understands why you chose me. I'd like to understand that myself. Draven was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. There are things I am not ready to explain fully, not yet. But I will tell you this much. When I entered that auction hall, I was not searching for an Omega to buy. I had no intention of purchasing anyone. Then why did you? Because the moment I caught your scent, I knew you were not what everyone believed you to be. He paused, watching her reaction closely. Your scent is not weak, Alara. It is masked, hidden, somehow, from nearly everyone who might otherwise notice it, but not from me. Ilara's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Masked? What does that mean? I don't fully know yet, Draven admitted, and for the first time, she heard real uncertainty in his voice. It's rare, what you have. I've read about cases like it, though I've never encountered one myself until now. Whatever the cause, it has kept your true nature hidden from everyone around you, including yourself. My true nature, Ilara repeated slowly. You're saying there's something wrong with me. Something more than what the healers already said. Not wrong, Draven corrected firmly. Different. Hidden. There's a difference, and I intend to help you understand it, when the time is right. Ilara set down her fork, frustration rising in her chest. Why not now? Why all this mystery? I deserve to know what's happening to my own life. You do, Draven agreed. And you will, but some truths need time before they can be understood properly. I don't want to overwhelm you before you've even had a full day to adjust to everything that's changed. Ilara wanted to argue further, but something in his tone told her pushing wouldn't get her anywhere today. She swallowed her frustration and nodded, though her mind buzzed with new questions layered on top of the old ones. After breakfast, Draven offered to show her around the castle grounds himself, an offer that surprised her given how busy a king's schedule was likely to be. They walked together through wide stone corridors, past libraries filled with towering shelves of books, training yards, where soldiers sparred under the morning sun, and gardens bursting with flowers Ilara had never seen before. Everywhere they went, people paused to bow, their eyes flicking curiously toward Ilara, before quickly looking away. She noticed the way conversations dropped into silence as they passed, only to resume in hushed whispers once they thought themselves out of earshot. They're not used to seeing you bring anyone here, Ilara observed carefully, as they walked through a quiet corridor. No, Draven admitted. I haven't brought anyone to this castle in a long time, not like this. Why not? He hesitated, choosing his words with obvious care. Being king means being watched constantly. Every choice I make becomes a matter for the entire court to discuss, dissect, and judge. I stopped bringing personal matters into that world a long time ago. But you brought me. Yes, he said simply, offering no further explanation, though something in the way he said it made Ilara's chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Their walk eventually led them to a grand hall where several nobles had gathered, deep in conversation. The moment they noticed Draven, the room fell into a respectful hush, and one by one, they turned their attention toward Ilara. A tall woman with sharp cheekbones and cold, calculating eyes stepped forward first, her expression carefully composed into something that resembled politeness, though Ilara sensed something sharper hiding beneath it. Your Majesty, the woman said smoothly, bowing her head slightly, we heard the most curious rumors this morning. It seems they were true after all. Lady Seraphine, Draven said, his tone even, though Ilara noticed a subtle stiffness settle into his posture. This is Ilara. Seraphine's gaze swept over Ilara from head to toe, her expression unreadable, though the faint curl at the corner of her mouth suggested judgment she wasn't bothering to hide entirely. How unexpected, she said finally. I must admit, Your Majesty, the entire court is buzzing with questions about your sudden decision. An Omega auction, of all places, not exactly where one expects to find their king. I wasn't aware my presence there required an explanation, Draven replied evenly. Of course not, Seraphine said quickly, though her smile did not reach her eyes. Forgive my curiosity. It's simply unusual, given that you've turned away every eligible match presented to you these past 2 years, only to suddenly claim someone from an auction block. The word claim hung heavily in the air, and Ilara felt her cheeks flush, uncertain how to respond to the implication behind it. She glanced at Draven, unsure whether to defend herself or stay silent. Ilara is a guest in my home, Draven said firmly, his tone leaving no room for further questions. That is all anyone needs to understand for now. Seraphine's smile widened slightly, though her eyes remained cool. Of course, Your Majesty, a guest. She turned her attention back to Ilara, her gaze lingering a moment too long. Welcome to the castle, dear. I do hope you find your place here, comfortably. There was something in the way she said comfortably that made Ilara's skin prickle with unease, though she couldn't quite explain why. She forced a polite nod, and Seraphine finally turned away, gliding back toward the other nobles with practiced grace. Once they were alone again, walking further down the corridor, Ilara glanced up at Draven. Who was that? Lady Seraphine, Draven said, his jaw tightening slightly, daughter of one of the most influential noble families in the kingdom. She has expectations regarding her place in my future plans. What kind of expectations? The kind that don't concern you, Draven said, a little too quickly, and Ilara sensed there was far more to that story than he was willing to share right now. They continued their walk in silence for a while, the earlier tension slowly easing as they moved through quieter parts of the castle grounds. Eventually they reached a small garden tucked away behind a stone wall, filled with flowers Ilara didn't recognize, their petals a deep shade of blue she had never seen before. This is my favorite place in the entire castle, Draven admitted, something softer entering his voice as he looked around the quiet space. Hardly anyone knows about it. Why show it to me? He turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful. Because I think you understand what it feels like to need a place where no one is watching, judging, deciding your worth, before you've even had the chance to speak. Ilara's breath caught slightly at how accurately he had described a feeling she had carried her entire life. How did you know that? I didn't, Draven admitted, not for certain, but I recognized something in you back at that auction, something familiar. Loneliness looks the same on everyone, whether they're standing on a platform in chains, or sitting on a throne surrounded by people who only see a crown instead of a person. For the first time since arriving at the castle, Ilara felt a flicker of real connection, something beyond gratitude or confusion. She studied Draven's face, searching for the calculating politician Seraphine's words had hinted at, but found only quiet honesty staring back at her. Thank you, she said softly, for bringing me here, even if I don't fully understand why yet. You will, Draven promised. I meant what I said. When the time is right, I'll explain everything. They stood together in the quiet garden a while longer, the tension of the earlier encounter slowly fading into something calmer, something that felt, for the first time, like the beginning of trust. But elsewhere in the castle, in a private chamber lit by flickering candlelight, Lady Seraphine sat with two other nobles, her expression no longer polite or composed. An auction girl, she said coldly, swirling the wine in her glass. Weak scent, no bloodline, no standing. And he brings her here, into his home, like she's someone worth protecting. What do you intend to do? One of the nobles asked carefully. Seraphine's eyes narrowed, a slow, calculating smile spreading across her face. I intend to remind His Majesty exactly why that girl doesn't belong here. One way or another. Outside, unaware of the storm quietly gathering against her, Ilara walked beside Draven through the golden afternoon light, allowing herself, just for a little while, to believe that perhaps her life was finally beginning to change for the better. She had no way of knowing yet how much of a fight still lay ahead of her. 3 days passed before Draven finally called Ilara to his study, and in that time, she had learned the rhythms of the castle better than she expected to so quickly. She knew which servants smiled at her genuinely, and which only pretended politeness while their eyes judged her from behind. She knew the quiet garden had become her favorite place to escape the weight of constant stares. And she knew, more than anything, that the answers Draven promised her still hung unresolved between them, growing heavier with each passing day. When the summons finally came, delivered by a young guard who looked almost nervous to be speaking to her directly, Ilara felt her pulse quicken, with a mixture of relief and anxiety. Whatever Draven planned to tell her, she sensed it would change things. His study was a large room, lined with bookshelves, reaching all the way to the ceiling, a fire crackling softly in the hearth, despite the mild afternoon outside. Draven stood near the window when she entered, his back to her, hands clasped behind him, in a posture she was beginning to recognize as his way of preparing for something difficult. "You wanted to see me," Alara said, closing the door softly behind her. Draven turned, and for a moment, he simply studied her, as though gathering the courage to finally speak the truth he had been holding back. "Please, sit." Alara took a seat near the fire, watching as he moved to sit across from her, close enough that she could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he chose his next words. "What I'm about to tell you," he began, "will likely sound impossible. I ask only that you listen before you decide whether or not to believe me." "I'm listening," Alara said, her heart already beating faster. Draven took a slow breath. "Among alphas of royal bloodlines, there exists something rare, something most people go their entire lives without ever experiencing. It's called a fated bond, a connection between two people, chosen not by circumstance or family arrangement, but by something deeper, something instinctive." Alara's brow furrowed. "A fated bond? It happens when an alpha's senses recognize another person as their true match, beyond logic, beyond choice," Draven continued. "It's rare, even among royalty. My father spoke of it only once, describing it as a scent, unlike any other, one that calls to something ancient inside an alpha's blood." "And you're saying," Alara's voice trailed off, unable to finish the thought, "when I entered that auction hall, I caught a scent unlike anything I'd ever known," Draven said quietly, faint beneath layers of suppression, but unmistakable to me. "I followed it before I even understood what I was doing, and it led me straight to you." Alara sat in stunned silence, trying to process what he was telling her. "You're saying I'm your fated mate?" "Yes," Draven said simply. The word hung heavily in the room. Alara stood abruptly, needing to move, needing space to think. "That's not possible. My scent has always been weak. Everyone who's ever tried to court me said the same thing, that there was almost nothing there to sense at all. Because it was suppressed," Draven explained gently. "I don't yet understand why or how, but whatever masked your true scent, hid it from everyone except me. My bloodline carries heightened senses passed down through generations of royal alphas. It's the only reason I was able to detect what no one else could." Alara pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to steady the storm of emotions crashing through her. Her entire life, she had been told she was lacking, incomplete, unworthy of proper courtship. And now, standing in front of her, was a king, claiming she was something extraordinary instead. "Why should I believe this?" she asked finally, lowering her hands to look at him directly. "You could be telling me anything. How do I know this isn't some story to justify buying me at that auction?" "You don't," Draven admitted honestly. "Not yet. Trust isn't something I expect from you overnight, especially not with something this significant. But I didn't bring you here to trap you into believing something you're not ready to accept. I brought you here because I couldn't simply leave you to a fate you didn't deserve, whether or not the bond between us turns out to be real." Alara studied him carefully, searching for any sign of deception in his expression, but found only quiet sincerity staring back at her. Still, doubt lingered heavily in her chest, built from years of disappointment and rejection that had taught her not to trust promises too easily. "What happens now?" she asked finally. "If this bond is real, what does that mean for me?" "It means nothing you don't choose for yourself," Draven said firmly. "A bond may exist between us, but that doesn't mean you owe me anything because of it. I won't force you into anything you're not ready for, Alara. I only wanted you to understand the truth, so you could make your own choices with full knowledge of what's happening." Alara appreciated the honesty, even as uncertainty continued to churn inside her. "I need time," she admitted. "This is a lot to accept all at once." "Take as much time as you need," Draven said. "I'm not going anywhere." She nodded, though her mind remained a whirlwind of questions and doubts as she left his study that afternoon. She wandered the castle halls aimlessly, her thoughts too loud to focus on anything else, until she eventually found herself back in the quiet garden Draven had shown her days earlier. She sat on a stone bench, surrounded by deep blue flowers, replaying his words over and over in her mind. A fated bond. It sounded like something from the old stories her grandmother used to tell her as a child. Tales of destiny and impossible love, meant to comfort young Omegas dreaming of a life better than the one waiting for them. She had never believed those stories were real. She had certainly never imagined herself as the subject of one. You look deep in thought, a familiar voice said, startling her from her reflection. Ilara looked up to find Mira approaching, a gentle smile on her face, as she took a seat beside her on the bench. The king told me something today, Ilara admitted quietly, something I'm still trying to understand. Mira's expression softened, knowingly. About the bond? Ilara's eyes widened in surprise. You knew? I suspected, Mira admitted. I've served in this castle a long time, dear. I've seen the way the king carries himself differently since you arrived. Lighter, somehow, even though he tries to hide it behind his usual composure. Do you believe it's real? Ilara asked. This bond he described? Mira considered the question carefully before answering. I believe the king would not have risked so much, spent such an enormous fortune, or brought you into this castle so openly, if he wasn't certain of what he sensed. He's not a man who acts on impulse, Ilara. Everything he does is calculated, deliberate. Whatever drew him to you at that auction, I don't believe it was simple chance. Ilara turned the words over in her mind, feeling some of her doubt ease slightly, though not disappear entirely. Even if it's true, I don't know what it means for me. I've spent my whole life being told I wasn't enough for anyone. Now I'm supposed to believe I'm this? Someone fated for a king? You don't have to believe it all at once, Mira said gently. Just give yourself the chance to see where it leads, without forcing yourself to decide everything right now. Ilara nodded slowly, grateful for the quiet wisdom in Mira's words. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the garden, until Mira eventually rose to return to her duties, leaving Ilara alone with her thoughts once more. As the days passed, Ilara found herself watching Draven more closely, searching for signs of the connection he described. She noticed the way his gaze softened slightly whenever she entered a room, the careful patience he showed even when she pushed back against his explanations, the quiet ways he seemed to consider her comfort before his own. Slowly, cautiously, something began to shift between them. Their conversations grew longer, easier, filled with quiet laughter that surprised them both. Ilara found herself sharing pieces of her past she had never spoken aloud before. The loneliness of growing up in a pack that saw her as broken. The quiet ache of watching others find companionship while she remained overlooked. In turn, Draven shared pieces of his own guarded history, the isolation of his childhood, the immense pressure of ruling a kingdom from a young age after his father's sudden passing, the loneliness that came with a crown too heavy for most people to understand. I used to think strength meant never needing anyone, Draven admitted one evening, as they walked together through the quiet garden beneath a sky full of stars. My father taught me that showing vulnerability was a weakness no king could afford. And now? Ilara asked softly. Draven turned to look at her, something vulnerable flickering behind his usual composed expression. Now I think perhaps he was wrong. Ilara's heart fluttered at the quiet honesty in his voice, and for the first time since arriving at the castle, she allowed herself to consider a possibility she had never dared to imagine before. Perhaps this bond, whatever it truly was, wasn't something to fear. Perhaps it was something worth exploring, carefully, one honest moment at a time. But even as trust slowly began to bloom between them, the shadow of Lady Seraphine's cold smile lingered in the back of Ilara's mind, a quiet reminder that not everyone within these castle walls wished to see her happiness take root. The invitation arrived on a morning bright with sunlight, carried by a servant who bowed low before presenting Ilara with a folded piece of parchment sealed in deep blue wax, stamped with the royal crest. She unfolded it carefully, her eyes scanning the elegant handwriting inside. Lady Seraphine requests the pleasure of your company at a private gathering this afternoon, in the Eastern Garden. Ilara frowned, turning the parchment over, as though searching for some hidden explanation. She had not spoken directly with Seraphine since their brief, uncomfortable introduction days earlier, and something about this sudden invitation felt wrong, though she couldn't quite pinpoint why. She found Mira in the hallway outside her chambers, and showed her the note, watching as the older woman's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. I don't like this, Mira said slowly, reading the parchment twice over. Lady Seraphine doesn't extend invitations without purpose. Should I go? Ilara asked. I think you should be careful either way, Mira said. Perhaps mention it to the king before you decide. But when Alara sought out Draven, she was told he had left the castle early that morning to attend urgent matters in a neighboring territory, not expected to return until evening. Something in her hesitated at the thought of waiting for his return before making her own decisions. She had spent her entire life letting others decide things for her. She did not want to start relying on someone else to protect her from every small challenge she faced. "I'll go," Alara decided finally. "It's only a gathering. I can handle myself." Mira did not look entirely convinced, but she nodded regardless. "Just be careful, dear, and trust your instincts if something feels wrong." The eastern garden was smaller and more secluded than the one Draven had shown her, hidden behind tall hedges that muffled the sounds of the rest of the castle grounds. When Alara arrived, she found Seraphine already seated at a small table beneath a flowering tree, along with two other noblewomen Alara didn't recognize, their expressions polite but distant. "Alara, dear, you came," Seraphine said, rising gracefully to greet her with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Please, sit. I thought it was time we became better acquainted." Alara took the offered seat cautiously, aware of the curious, assessing glances from the other women at the table. "Thank you for the invitation," she said carefully. "Of course," Seraphine said smoothly, pouring tea into a delicate cup and sliding it toward Alara. "It must be quite an adjustment, coming from, well, wherever it is you came from, into a place like this." The subtle insult was not lost on Alara, though she kept her expression neutral. "It's certainly different," she agreed simply. The conversation continued in a similar fashion for a while, Seraphine's questions carefully worded to seem polite on the surface, while carrying an undercurrent of judgment beneath every word. She asked about Alara's family, her upbringing, her education, each question designed, Alara slowly realized, to highlight everything she lacked compared to the noble women surrounding her. "It really is remarkable," Seraphine said eventually, setting down her teacup with deliberate precision. "The king has never once, in all the years I've known him, shown interest in anyone the way he's shown interest in you, and you, with such humble origins." "I don't see why my origins should matter," Alara said, keeping her voice steady, despite the tension building in her chest. "Of course they matter, dear," Seraphine said, her smile sharpening slightly. "This kingdom has traditions, expectations, especially regarding matters as significant as the king's companionship. There are protocols that exist for good reason." "Are you suggesting I don't belong here?" Alara asked directly, tired of the careful dance of polite insults. Seraphine's eyes glittered with something colder now, the pretense of friendliness slipping away entirely. "I'm suggesting that fortune and desire are not the same as suitability, dear. The king may believe he's found something extraordinary in you, but belief and truth are often very different things." The other women at the table exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly unprepared for the conversation to turn so openly hostile. Alara felt her hands tighten around the teacup, years of old insecurities threatening to rise to the surface, whispering that Seraphine was right, that she truly didn't belong in a place like this. But then she remembered the quiet garden, Draven's honest words beneath the stars, the gentle way he had shown her kindness she had never received anywhere else in her life. She refused to let Seraphine's cruelty undo the fragile trust she had begun building. "I think," Alara said slowly, standing from her seat with as much composure as she could gather, "that suitability isn't something you get to decide for someone else, Lady Seraphine. If the king believes I belong here, that's a decision he's made for himself." Seraphine's expression flickered with surprise at Alara's unexpected boldness, quickly masked behind practiced composure. "How refreshingly direct," she said coolly. "I suppose we'll see how long that confidence lasts." Alara turned and walked away from the table without another word, her heart pounding from the confrontation, though she refused to let her steps falter until she was well out of sight of the eastern garden. That evening, when Draven returned to the castle, he found Alara sitting alone in the library, a book open on her lap, though her eyes remained unfocused, still replaying the afternoon's confrontation in her mind. "You seem troubled," he said gently, taking a seat across from her. Alara hesitated only briefly, before recounting the events of the afternoon, watching as Draven's expression grew increasingly tense with each detail she shared. "I should have warned you more clearly about her," Draven said, frustration evident in his voice once she finished. "Seraphine has made her feelings about my choices clear before. though I didn't expect her to approach you so directly. She's not wrong to question things, Alara admitted quietly. I don't have noble blood. I don't understand court traditions or politics. Sometimes I wonder if she's simply saying aloud what everyone else here is already thinking. Then let them think it, Draven said firmly. Their opinions don't determine your worth, Alara. I won't allow anyone in this castle, noble blood or not, to make you feel unwelcome in your own home. Something about the fierce protectiveness in his voice eased the tight knot of anxiety in Alara's chest, even as new questions rose in its place. What exactly does Seraphine want from you? She spoke as though she expected to hold some place in your life. Draven sighed, running a hand through his hair, a rare display of visible frustration. Her family has pushed for a match between us for years, hoping to strengthen political alliances. I've never encouraged it, but that hasn't stopped her from believing it's simply a matter of time before I change my mind. And now that I'm here, now she sees you as a threat to those expectations, Draven finished. I won't pretend her reaction will end with one uncomfortable conversation. Seraphine isn't someone who gives up easily when she feels entitled to something. Alara absorbed this information carefully, understanding now the deeper layers behind the tension she had felt since arriving. She was not simply navigating a new environment. She was standing in the middle of political maneuvering, far more complicated than she had realized. I don't want to cause problems for you, she said quietly. If my presence here creates conflict within the court. Don't, Draven interrupted gently but firmly. Don't apologize for existing, Alara. Whatever conflict arises from Seraphine's ambitions is not your burden to carry. It's mine. Over the following days, Draven made his position clearer to the court, formally announcing Alara's place within the castle during a small gathering of nobles, his tone leaving little room for further questioning of her presence. Though whispers continued to follow her through the hallways, the open hostility softened somewhat under the weight of the king's clear declaration. Seraphine, however, remained noticeably absent from most gatherings, following the confrontation in the Eastern Garden, a silence that unsettled Alara more than any direct challenge could have. She's planning something, Alara admitted to Mira one evening as they sat together in the quiet garden. I can feel it. Probably, Mira agreed, not bothering to offer false comfort. Seraphine isn't someone who accepts defeat easily. But you're not facing her alone anymore, dear. Remember that. Alara nodded slowly, drawing comfort from the truth in Mira's words, even as unease continued to settle heavily in her chest. Whatever Seraphine was planning, she sensed it would not remain hidden for long. And deep within the castle's private chambers, behind closed doors lit only by flickering candlelight, Lady Seraphine sat with a small group of trusted allies, her expression sharp and determined, as she outlined plans meant to ensure Alara's place within these walls would not last much longer. The king believes he's found something rare, Seraphine said coldly, swirling wine within her glass. Let's remind him exactly how fragile, rare things truly are. Weeks passed, and slowly, the castle that once felt like a strange, unfamiliar place began to feel, cautiously, like something close to home. Alara learned the names of the servants who greeted her warmly each morning, discovered quiet corners of the library where she could lose herself in books for hours, and found herself laughing more easily than she had in years, especially in the company of the one person she once believed she would never understand. Her relationship with Draven continued to grow, built slowly through countless small moments rather than any single dramatic gesture. He began joining her for breakfast every morning without fail, setting aside his usual pile of papers to simply talk with her about anything and everything, from her favorite childhood memories to his frustrations with certain stubborn members of his council. You're smiling, Draven observed one morning, watching her over the rim of his teacup. Am I? Alara asked, genuinely surprised. She hadn't realized how natural it had become to feel light in his presence. You are, he confirmed, a small smile of his own tugging at the corner of his mouth. It suits you. Alara felt warmth spread through her chest at the simple compliment, still unaccustomed to receiving kindness so freely after a lifetime of dismissal and rejection. She studied him for a moment, noticing the way the morning light caught the sharp lines of his face, softened somehow by the easy comfort that had grown between them. Can I ask you something? She said finally. Anything, Draven replied. Do you regret it? Buying me at that auction, I mean. Bringing all of this complexity into your life. Draven set down his cup, his expression growing serious as he considered her question carefully. "Not for a single moment," he said firmly. "If anything, I regret not finding you sooner. I spent 2 years searching for a scent I feared I might never find again, wondering if perhaps I had imagined it entirely. Finding you, even under those circumstances, was the answer to a question I had almost given up asking." Alara's heart fluttered at the sincerity in his voice, the vulnerability he allowed himself to show so openly. "I used to think no one would ever choose me," she admitted quietly. "My whole life, I was the one left standing alone, the one nobody wanted." "They were wrong," Draven said simply, reaching across the table to gently take her hand. "Every single person who overlooked you was wrong, Alara. I hope, in time, you'll come to believe that as fully as I do." The warmth of his hand around hers sent a gentle shiver through her. Unfamiliar but not unwelcome. She found herself leaning slightly closer, drawn toward him by something she couldn't quite name, something instinctive and undeniable. Over the following days, their bond continued to deepen in quiet, meaningful ways. Draven began taking her beyond the castle walls, on short excursions, into the surrounding city, introducing her to local merchants and hidden corners of the marketplace he clearly cherished, but rarely had time to visit anymore. "You know these people well," Alara observed one afternoon, watching him exchange easy conversation with an elderly baker, who greeted him not with the formal reverence of the court, but with genuine warmth and familiarity. "I used to sneak out here often as a young man," Draven admitted, a rare, boyish smile crossing his face. "Before the responsibilities of the crown made it more complicated to move freely. This city raised me just as much as the castle did." Alara loved these small glimpses into the man beneath the crown, the version of Draven who existed beyond duty and expectation, who still remembered the joy of simple pleasures like fresh bread from a favorite bakery, or quiet conversations with old friends. In turn, she found herself opening up more fully than she ever had with anyone before, sharing memories she had long kept buried, fears she had never spoken aloud, hopes she had almost forgotten she once carried before years of rejection taught her to expect disappointment instead. "I used to dream of traveling," she admitted one evening, as they walked together along a quiet path overlooking the city lights below. "Seeing places beyond my small pack's territory. It felt like an impossible dream back then." "It doesn't have to remain impossible," Draven said gently. "There's an entire kingdom beyond these walls, Alara. If you want to see it, I'd be honored to show it to you." The promise settled warmly in her chest, another small piece of the life she had never believed she deserved, slowly becoming real before her eyes. She glanced up at him, studying the sincerity etched across his features, and felt something shift fully into place within her heart. "Draven," she said softly, testing the intimacy of his name without any formal title attached. He turned to look at her, something soft and hopeful flickering behind his eyes. "Yes? I think I'm starting to understand what you meant about the bond between us." His breath seemed to catch slightly at her words, though he remained carefully still, giving her space to continue without pressure. "What do you mean?" "I've spent so much of my life believing I was incapable of being truly wanted," Alara continued, her voice steady, despite the vulnerability of her confession. "But when I'm with you, I don't feel like the girl nobody wanted anymore. I feel like myself, finally, for the first time." Draven reached up, gently brushing a strand of hair away from her face, his touch feather-light and reverent. "You are so much more than anyone ever allowed you to believe, Alara. I only wish I could have spared you all those years of feeling otherwise. You've given me more than enough now," she whispered. The space between them grew smaller, charged with a quiet, undeniable pull. Neither of them tried to resist any longer. When their lips finally met, soft and hesitant at first, Alara felt something settle deep within her, a sense of rightness she had never experienced before, as though every piece of her life had been leading toward this single, perfect moment. When they finally parted, Draven rested his forehead gently against hers, his breath still slightly unsteady. "I've waited 2 years to feel this certain about anything," he admitted quietly. "I'm glad you found me," Alara whispered back. "I'm glad I never stopped searching," Draven replied. They stood together beneath the stars for a long while, the weight of the world outside their quiet bubble, momentarily forgotten, replaced instead by the simple, profound comfort of finally belonging somewhere, with someone, fully and completely. But even as their bond blossomed into something undeniable, whispers continued to move through the castle's darker corners, carried by those who refused to accept the growing connection between the king and the Omega girl, once deemed unworthy by an entire kingdom. Lady Seraphine watched from a distance, her jealousy sharpening into something colder, more dangerous with each passing day, as the gentle warmth between Draven and Alara grew increasingly difficult to ignore. "They grow closer by the day," she murmured to her closest ally one evening, watching from a castle window as Draven and Alara walked together through the moonlit garden below. "It seems gentle persuasion alone will not be enough to remind him of his obligations." "What do you propose instead?" her companion asked cautiously. Seraphine's eyes narrowed, calculating and cold, something far more permanent. Unaware of the storm quietly building against them, Alara and Draven continued to grow closer with each passing day, their bond strengthening into something neither of them could imagine living without, blissfully unaware of just how soon that fragile happiness would be tested. The formal banquet had been planned for weeks, an event meant to publicly introduce Alara to the wider nobility of the kingdom, a step Draven insisted upon once he felt certain of the bond between them. Alara had spent days both anticipating and dreading the occasion, aware that stepping fully into public view meant facing every whisper, every judgment, without the comfort of hiding away in quiet corners any longer. "You don't have to be nervous," Draven reassured her, as Mira made final adjustments to the deep sapphire gown Alara wore, its fabric shimmering softly beneath the candlelight of her chambers. "Tonight, everyone will see exactly what I've known since the moment I found you." "I hope you're right," Alara admitted, smoothing her hands nervously over the fabric of her dress. "I am," Draven said with quiet certainty, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead, before offering his arm to escort her toward the grand hall. The banquet hall glittered beneath hundreds of candles, long tables draped in fine linens and set with polished silverware, surrounded by nobles dressed in their finest attire. Conversations paused as Draven and Alara entered together, the weight of dozens of curious eyes settling upon them, though this time, Alara found herself standing taller beneath the attention, steadied by the quiet strength of Draven's presence beside her. Throughout the evening, nobles approached cautiously, offering polite introductions and careful conversation, their curiosity slowly softening into something closer to genuine acceptance, as they witnessed the easy, natural warmth between the king and the woman he so clearly cherished. Alara found herself relaxing slightly as the night progressed, allowing herself to enjoy small moments of laughter and connection she had once believed impossible within these walls. Lady Seraphine, seated near the head of the table, with a carefully composed smile fixed firmly in place, watched the growing acceptance around her, with quiet, simmering resentment. She raised her wineglass in a toast when called upon, her voice smooth and gracious, betraying none of the cold calculation hidden just beneath the surface. It was during a quiet lull in the evening, as musicians began a gentle melody, and several couples moved toward the dance floor, that Alara first noticed something faintly unsettling. A servant she didn't recognize approached the table, carrying a fresh tray of drinks, his movements slightly too rigid, his eyes darting nervously toward Seraphine's private table, before continuing forward. Alara glanced toward Draven, who was deep in conversation with one of his advisors, seemingly unaware of the servant's odd behavior. She watched carefully as the servant approached their table, setting down a fresh goblet of wine directly in front of Draven's seat, before quickly retreating into the crowd. Something about the exchange nagged uncomfortably at the back of Alara's mind, though she couldn't immediately identify why. She glanced toward the goblet, then back toward the servant's retreating figure, a subtle unease prickling along her skin. When Draven finally returned his attention to the table, reaching for the goblet without hesitation, Alara's instincts flared sharply. "Wait," she said suddenly, placing her hand gently, but firmly over his, before he could bring the glass to his lips. Draven paused, glancing at her with mild surprise. "Is something wrong?" "I don't know," Alara admitted honestly, her heart pounding. "Something about that drink feels wrong." The servant who brought it, he seemed nervous, like he didn't want to be noticed. Draven's expression shifted immediately into sharp focus, years of political awareness kicking into place at her words. He gestured subtly toward one of his personal guards standing nearby, who approached quietly. "Have this tested before anyone touches it," Draven instructed quietly, careful to keep his voice low enough not to draw unwanted attention from the surrounding tables. The guard nodded, and discreetly carried the goblet away, disappearing through a side door. Alara felt her pulse racing as they waited, forcing herself to maintain a calm, composed expression, despite the anxiety twisting tightly in her chest. Several tense minutes passed before the guard returned, his expression grim as he leaned down to whisper quietly into Draven's ear. Alara watched Draven's jaw tighten, his eyes darkening with barely restrained anger. "What is it?" she asked quietly, once the guard stepped back. "The wine was poisoned," Draven said, his voice low and controlled, though the tension radiating from him was unmistakable. A slow-acting poison, difficult to detect until it was too late. Alara's stomach dropped, the full weight of what had almost happened settling heavily over her. If she hadn't noticed the servant's nervous behavior, if she hadn't trusted her instincts enough to stop him, Draven might have unknowingly consumed something meant to end his life. "Who would do this?" she whispered, though even as she asked, her mind immediately turned toward Seraphine's cold, calculating smile from earlier in the evening. Draven's expression confirmed her suspicion, before he even spoke. "I intend to find out, immediately." The rest of the banquet dissolved into quiet chaos, as Draven quietly signaled his guards to secure the hall, without alarming the wider crowd, ensuring the servant responsible for delivering the poisoned drink could not slip away unnoticed. Within the hour, the young servant was found trembling in a hidden corridor, quickly confessing under careful questioning that he had been paid handsomely for the task, though he claimed ignorance regarding the poison itself, believing instead he was simply delivering a private message. "Who paid you?" Draven demanded, his voice carrying an authority that left no room for hesitation. The servant's eyes darted nervously before he finally admitted the truth. "Lady Seraphine, Your Majesty." She said it was simply a private matter between nobles, nothing more. The confirmation settled like ice through Alara's veins, though she wasn't entirely surprised given everything she had witnessed since her arrival. Draven's expression hardened into something colder and more determined than she had ever seen from him before. Seraphine was summoned before the full court within the hour, her earlier composure cracking slightly as guards escorted her firmly into the grand hall, now emptied of banquet guests, and filled instead with a tense, watchful silence. "This is absurd," Seraphine protested, though her voice wavered slightly beneath the weight of Draven's cold, unwavering stare. "I would never." "The servant has already confessed," Draven interrupted sharply. "Your involvement is beyond question at this point, Seraphine. I suggest you consider carefully whether further denial serves you at all." Seraphine's expression shifted rapidly through several emotions: panic, indignation, and finally, cold resignation, as she realized the futility of continued denial. "I did what was necessary," she said finally, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "You would have thrown away everything, every alliance, every expectation this kingdom has built for generations, for some auction girl with no bloodline, no standing, nothing to offer beyond whatever illusion you've convinced yourself is real. Alara has more integrity in her smallest finger than you've shown in your entire life," Draven said coldly. "Whatever expectations your family held for our alliance, they ended the moment you chose to threaten her life to secure them." Seraphine's face paled as the full weight of her situation settled over her, the reality of her failed scheme finally sinking in fully. "You will be stripped of your title and holdings, effective immediately," Draven continued, his voice carrying the full authority of his crown. "You will be escorted beyond the kingdom's borders by morning, and should you ever attempt to return, the consequences will be far more severe than exile." Seraphine opened her mouth as though to argue further, but the cold finality in Draven's expression silenced whatever protest she might have offered. She was led away by the guards in tense, humiliated silence, her carefully constructed plans crumbling entirely around her. Once the hall emptied, Draven turned to Alara, his expression softening from the sharp authority he had shown moments earlier into something gentler, filled with quiet gratitude and relief. "You saved my life tonight," he said softly, reaching out to gently cup her face in his hands. "I couldn't lose you," Alara admitted, her voice trembling slightly as the adrenaline of the evening finally began to fade, leaving raw vulnerability in its place. Not after everything we've built together." Draven pulled her gently into his arms, holding her close, as the weight of the night's danger finally settled fully over them both. "You won't have to," he promised quietly. "I intend to spend the rest of my life ensuring you never have reason to fear losing what we've found together." Alara rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady, reassuring rhythm of his heartbeat, grateful beyond words that the danger had passed, that the bond between them had proven strong enough to protect them both when it mattered most. Outside the castle walls, as dawn broke softly over the horizon, word of Seraphine's exile spread quickly through the kingdom, along with whispers of the remarkable young Omega, whose instincts had saved their king's life. The narrative surrounding Alara shifted rapidly from curiosity and doubt into something closer to quiet admiration, the final threads of resistance against her place within the castle beginning to unravel entirely. But for Alara, the events of that night meant something far more personal than political victory. They meant, finally and completely, that she was no longer simply someone fortunate enough to be chosen. She was someone capable of protecting the life she had built, and the man who had given her the chance to build it in the first place. Months passed following the banquet, and the kingdom slowly settled into a new rhythm, one shaped by the quiet strength of the bond between its king and the woman once dismissed as unworthy of anyone's attention. Alara had grown comfortable within the castle walls, in ways she once believed impossible, her presence no longer questioned by whispers in hallways or curious glances from passing nobles. Instead, she had become something of a quiet legend among the staff and citizens alike, the Omega girl who had sensed danger where trained guards had missed it entirely, whose instincts had saved their king's life when it mattered most. Children in the nearby city sometimes waved to her when she walked through the marketplace with Draven, and merchants greeted her by name, no longer merely out of respect for her position, but out of genuine fondness that had grown steadily over time. On a crisp autumn morning, Draven called her once again to his study, though this time, his expression carried none of the heavy uncertainty that had marked their earlier conversation about the bond between them. Instead, there was something warm and hopeful in his eyes as she entered, closing the door softly behind her. "You wanted to see me?" Alara asked, settling into the familiar chair across from his desk. "I did," Draven confirmed, though instead of remaining behind his desk, he moved around it, kneeling gently in front of her, taking her hands carefully into his own. Alara's breath caught at the unexpected gesture, her heart beginning to race as she studied the quiet determination etched across his features. "Alara," Draven began, his voice steady despite the vulnerability visible in his eyes. "When I first found you, I told myself I simply needed to understand the bond between us, to offer you safety and a chance at a life better than the one you'd been given. I never expected to find myself here, kneeling before you, wanting nothing more than to spend the rest of my life earning your trust, your happiness, your love, for as long as you'll allow me the privilege." Alara's eyes filled with tears as she listened, overwhelmed by the sincerity of his words, the journey that had brought them from a cold auction platform to this quiet, intimate moment. "I'm asking you," Draven continued, "not as your king, not because of some ancient bond neither of us fully chose, but simply as a man who has fallen completely and irrevocably in love with the woman sitting in front of me. Alara, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife, my queen, and my partner in everything that lies ahead?" For a moment, Alara could hardly speak, her heart too full of emotion to form the words immediately. She thought of the frightened girl who once stood chained on an auction platform, convinced she would never matter to anyone, and marveled at how far she had traveled since that terrifying, uncertain day. "Yes," she finally whispered, tears slipping freely down her cheeks. "Yes, Draven. I choose you, fully and completely, exactly as you chose me." Draven's face broke into a rare, unrestrained smile as he rose to gather her into his arms, holding her close, as though he never intended to let go. Alara laughed softly through her tears, wrapping her arms around him in return, savoring the warmth and certainty of the moment neither of them had dared to imagine possible not so long ago. News of their engagement spread quickly through the kingdom, met with widespread celebration among citizens who had come to admire Alara's quiet strength and genuine kindness over the preceding months. Preparations for the royal wedding began almost immediately, the entire castle buzzing with excitement as Mira and the other staff worked tirelessly to ensure every detail reflected the joy of the occasion. On the morning of the wedding, Elara stood before a tall mirror in her chambers, hardly recognizing the woman staring back at her. Her gown was simple yet elegant, deep ivory fabric embroidered delicately with silver thread, a design she had chosen herself, reflecting both the humble beginnings she never intended to forget and the new life she now stepped confidently into. "You look absolutely radiant, dear," Mira said softly, tears glistening in her eyes as she adjusted the final details of Elara's gown. "Thank you, Mira," Elara said warmly, embracing the woman who had become like family to her over the past months. "For everything. I don't think I could have survived those first difficult days without your kindness." "You would have found your way regardless," Mira said, smiling through her tears. "You've always had more strength within you than you gave yourself credit for." The ceremony itself took place within the castle's grand courtyard, decorated beautifully with flowers from the garden Draven had first shown her, deep blue blossoms weaving elegantly among white and silver ribbons. Citizens from the nearby city gathered respectfully beyond the courtyard gates, eager to witness the joyful occasion that had captured the kingdom's imagination over recent months. As Elara walked down the aisle, her eyes met Draven's, standing tall and composed at the altar, though the emotion clearly visible in his expression betrayed the depth of feeling he rarely allowed others to witness so openly. Elara felt her own composure waver slightly, overwhelmed by the love reflected so plainly in his gaze. The ceremony passed in a blur of joyful emotion, vows exchanged with quiet sincerity that resonated far beyond the formal words spoken aloud. When Draven finally leaned forward to seal their union with a gentle kiss, the courtyard erupted into cheers and applause, the entire kingdom celebrating alongside the couple who had overcome so much to arrive at this joyful moment together. Later that evening, following hours of celebration filled with music, laughter, and warmth from citizens and nobles alike, Elara found herself standing quietly beside Draven, on a balcony overlooking the city below, the lights of the celebration still glowing warmly beneath the night sky. "Do you remember what I told you, that first night in the carriage?" Draven asked softly, wrapping an arm gently around her waist. "You said I wasn't what everyone thought I was," Elara recalled, leaning comfortably into his embrace. "I meant every word," Draven said, "but I don't think even I fully understood then just how true that would become. You've shown this entire kingdom, and me most of all, exactly what strength and grace truly look like." Elara smiled softly, resting her head against his shoulder as she gazed out over the city she now called home, filled with people who had come to embrace her, not despite her humble beginnings, but because of the quiet resilience those beginnings had shaped within her. "I used to believe I was unworthy of being wanted," she admitted quietly. "That auction platform taught me that lesson better than anything else in my life ever had." "And now?" Draven asked gently. Elara turned to look at him fully, her eyes shining with quiet certainty. "Now I understand that being overlooked by people who couldn't recognize my worth was never a reflection of who I truly was. It simply meant the right person hadn't found me yet." Draven leaned down, pressing a tender kiss to her forehead, holding her close beneath the stars that had witnessed the beginning of their bond so many months earlier. "I'm endlessly grateful I was the one who finally did," he murmured softly. Below them, the city continued its joyful celebration late into the night, unaware that the quiet Omega girl, once deemed worthless by an entire kingdom, had become not only their beloved queen, but a living reminder that true worth was never something others could determine from the outside. It was something only recognized fully by those wise enough and brave enough to look beyond the surface and see what truly lay beneath. And within the walls of a castle that had once felt cold and unfamiliar, Elara finally understood, completely and without doubt, that she had found not just a home, but exactly where she was always meant to belong.